Good afternoon, my beautiful people. I'm Sotadeology. In today's video, we're going to dissect Sotadeology Lecture 8, the mathematical system of consciousness. You heard me right, mathematical system of consciousness. Today, we're going to actually use the mathematics, which is known as formula of everything, to dissect what consciousness is. Well, before applying the formula of everything to explain or to illustrate what consciousness is, I have used this formula to unravel the mystery of the universe in order to, explain what the reality of the universe is. And I discovered that to be static and undulating field. Well, that is ideal because when you look at the expanding face of the universe, it's a field. It's a field that is propagating outwards. And then when you look at the inside a black hole, that too is another field that is, propagating inwards. Now, there must be a point where there will be, where you can have transition. And at that point, the effect of expansion has to be eliminated or has to be shut down so that it can transit to another phase of contraction. So at that point, energy has to be smooth. And when that is equal to the smooth flow of time, then we can have that static and undulating field. Static and undulating field is a field that has no direction. It is not expanding, neither is it contracting. So it is synonymous to standing wave. The standing wave that was actually, proposed by Louis de Broglie. He said that there must be a point where the circumference of electrons wave will intersect that of the nucleus for us to have the standing wave, and that will make electron to be suspended to nucleus. So now the solution is that static and undulating field. Now, the instant transmission of information through that static and undulating field is what we know as consciousness. Now, the question now is information void of matter? Because the neuroscientists will tell you that the feeling of consciousness will have something to do with matter, based on the fact that brain is even made up of matters and all that. What I want to tell you that information is not void of matter. When you look at it, when information is being quantified, it becomes a matter. For instance, if you quantify the state of a particular, if you quantify the state of information, say 1 or 0, it has become a matter in that sense. So information is not void of matter, and then we get to see all that as we progress in this video. So now, there is one key thing that we're going to use in this particular video that will, give us the clear picture of what consciousness is, and that is going to be the relativity of simultaneity. Relativity of simultaneity is a big problem when it comes to unraveling the structure of time. So that shows that it is difficult for us to really have a global now, because it is difficult to have two events happening simultaneously in the universe when they are far apart from each other. But by having that static and undulating field, we can have instant transmission of information. At that point, the discrete nature of energy has become smooth. And when that is equal to the smooth flow of time, then we have that static and undulating field, and so we can have the instant transmission of information. And as a result of that, we're going to have a clear we're going to have, deterministic experience, because consciousness has to be deterministic. It's supposed not to be probabilistic, in the sense that probabilistic is characterized by uncertainty principle, and that is a kind of, the latency that we have in the trajectory of energy relatively or relative to the smooth flow of time. And so that is the tilt effect of time peregrination towards the past, when you have momentum away from the real classical mass world. And it is also the tilt effect of time peregrination towards the future, when you have, momentum towards the real classical mass world. So we're going to dive deep into all that. Now, the formula we're going to use is this particular formula, which is known as formula of everything. The T, the M equal to capital UN plus 4M. Formula of everything. We can actually use this formula to unravel so many things in the universe. Now, it's a powerful formula that feeds back on itself. What I mean by that is that when you give it an input, it will generate an output. Then you can use that generated output as input to generate further output. That's how this formula works. And then we're going to see effect of that as we progress. Now, this UM is the strong conveying force, SCF, and this 4M is weak conveying force. We're going to see how this weak part of this formula will be suspended by this strong force, and then the spontaneous response of that will be to have free fall, because when you have a suspension beyond the constant constraint of light speed or of gravity, then the next thing will now be to have the free fall. So we're going to see how that works. So now, let's say what we know is this electron's mass worth, which is 9.109 times 10 raised power minus 31 kilogram. If we put that in the place of this M and in place of this M, it will give us the classical mass worth, the counterpart, which is the classical counterpart of this electron's mass worth, and that will be 2,277,250,000 kilograms. Now, this mass worth, this classical mass worth, is situated here. Now, how do we know that this mass worth is situated right here? The expanding value of the strong conveying force to the weak conveying force. Here we have energy density. Energy density that we have here is the suspension of this weak conveying force to the strong conveying trajectory. Now, this value, when you compare that to this, the ideal location of the mass worth is going to be around this place. By having it right here, that shows that whatever consciousness we're going to have along this line is incomplete. And I will tell you why it is incomplete very soon. So now, we have another energy density right here. This is the quantum suspension point. This is the classical suspension point. Now, this is the constancy of light speed, and this is the constancy of gravitational speed. Now, you can see that inside the time energy wave, we have equilateral triangle, and that equilateral triangle sustains the symmetric nature of the universe by allowing us to have constant speed of light and then constant speed of gravity. Now, if you look at this classical area and this quantum area, they are similar. Then how is it that we have smooth nature here and then we have discrete nature right here? Why is it? Why is it like that? Now, to first explain that, we have mass convergence at the classical level, and here we have expansion. There is no contraction here. Here, we do not have any trace of mass convergence, because in the classical system, you can see that we have real classical mass worth right inside the system. But in the quantum system, there is no real quantum mass worth inside the system except outside the system. We only have it outside the system. And that tells you the nature of electromagnetic field. So we know that the mediating force, or the mediating force of electromagnetic field, which is photon, is massless. So this supports that massless nature of light. Okay, now if you look at this, even though the electromagnetic field is expanding relatively to the gravitational field that we have at this classical level, there is a kind of contraction. As it expands, it as well contracts, so that it can sustain the radiation that we facilitate, that will support that mass convergence formation at the classical level. So here we have expanding electromagnetic field that is as well contracted, and as a result of that, the space that we have here is not wide enough for the mediating force to transit into the higher dimension to allow for smoothness. So that the trajectory is being constantly broken based on that contractness, or based on that compactness of the light or of electromagnetic nature. But here there is enough room, enough space for the mediating force to transit into the higher dimension to allow for the smoothness of mass worth that we have right here. Now, because the nature of trajectory here is discrete, there is a form of tilt effect relative to the smooth flow of time. In this sense, we can say that the flow of time is ahead of the trajectory of light speed, and so vertically the trajectory is somehow slant. So now, what is the implication of that to consciousness? The implication of that to consciousness is that we're not going to have clarity as to the position, as to discover or to identify the position of matter or particles or mass in that kind of the system. So that is the implication. So in this phase of expansion, there is nothing like consciousness. Consciousness cannot be materialized in this phase. Then in this phase of black hole where we have contraction, consciousness cannot be materialized as well. Now it happens that it's only at the central, at this vertical line, that we can have consciousness, and this is the present phase of time peregrination, or we can as well call it event horizon. So definitely all the things that have entered into black hole, we can we can have their record at the event horizon. Then as we progress, we'll get to know where exactly we can actually find the record. So we can find the record of the entirety of the universe at every event horizon. So now let's now proceed. So because there is latency in trajectory of energy to the trajectory of time in the expanding phase, there is no clarity, and so we cannot have consciousness. Now, when it gets to this point, then the constant effect has to be broken, and so we call it, the moment the symmetric nature of the universe is broken at this point, then we can have a constantly accelerated momentum. I said constantly accelerated momentum in the sense that we're going to have a compacted equilateral triangle, and that forms the nucleus system of the black hole. So now, the moment this is broken, then the equilateral triangle will be compacted, and so the constant speed will be hiked, and when that is hiked, it will move towards the smoothness around the edge of this energy wave, because by compacting the equilateral triangle, then the slice of that constancy is being, reduced to the point that it can actually align to this energy wave. And once we have that, we're going to have standing wave. And once we have standing wave, that is the wave that has no direction in form of, propagating outwards or propagating inwards. And once we have that, then we have instantiated this line which is static and undulating field. Now it doesn't stop there. So by having that, what that is telling us is that energy has become smooth, and that is equal to the smoothness of time flow, and so we could have this vertical line. So the singularity is being sustained at a point that is equal to the singularity of time curvature, and so we can have this straight line. And by having this straight line, we then have global now, and that has solved the problem, the challenge of relativity of simultaneity. By having that, then it turns out that this is the spot where we can have consciousness. So now, at this point, it's more or less like time, trajectory, energy, everything is being frozen. So we can easily see the location. We can see where the mass was, the classical mass was. We can see where it is located. Now the problem now is that we cannot locate the quantum mass worth. So the quantum mass worth is the missing piece. The quantum mass worth is the missing piece that must be located. And once that is found, there must be a feedback that we travel back to this classical mass worth, and that instant transmission of that feedback is what we have as conscious sensation. That's what we have as conscious sensation. So now, since the quantum mass worth cannot be found even inside the nucleus, because when you look at, let me quickly give you what is happening right here. We have reached this place, we have standing wave, and so we have mass convergence. You understand? But now, when you supply this, I call this quantum wave amplitude value, 5.7 times 10. Now this value will vary based on the size of mass that we put in the formula of everything. It will vary, and that is why we say we need to track the evolution of time, relatively to emergence of mass convergence. And once we have that, we can get the reality of the universe. So now this quantum wave amplitude, this value, when we put that right inside this formula, we're going to get this particular value. So by having this value, we know this value is bigger than this, and this tells us the mass convergence towards the 0 point of this energy wave. So it means that in this nucleus, we have resistance, which is the resistance is in form of mass accumulation. So even though we now have free fall right from here down to this spot, when it gets to the nucleus, there is resistance, and that is why we have ground energy state in the electrons shell of energy levels. You understand? So that one is quite understandable, yes. But now we cannot really get the actual mass worth of electron. It's more or less like electron is missing. Electron is right inside the nucleus, we know, because the mass worth of electron, which is this value, is bigger than this value. So electron has to be inside the nucleus. But electron is missing. It could be that electrons then electrons potential is being used in the nucleus to have the suspension to the nucleus, and as a result of that, we can't really gather the mass worth. But then it even could be that electrons mass worth has extended beyond the this system. So I will use this opportunity to tell you that what we have here is known as 2D. The whole system here is 2D. Is 2D. Now, I have video on dimensions, and we know that dimensions are hierarchical order of degree of freedom and powers. So now this 2D, as you are looking at it, it has the feature of 3D in itself. Now, by the virtue of this equilateral triangle, we have what is known as 3 symmetry lines. We have 3 symmetry lines, then we have 3 rotational order. 3 rotational order is a kind of rotation that is obtainable or feasible in the 3D, and then 3 line three symmetry lines. It means that this place is equal, this place is equal, this place is equal. So by having that, we have the trait of 3D right inside the 2D, and then the trait of 2D will be inside the higher dimension, which will now be the 3D. So in the region where the electron is found, or positron, that region is known as 3D. Please take note of that region, because now the moment we have standing wave at the point where the momentum, where the compacted equilateral triangles momentum intersect this energy wave, the standing wave that we're going to have will be projected upwardly like this, and based on that would give us 3D effect. You understand? So standing wave to this 2D will give us 3D system. But now the positron or electron is outside the time energy wave system, and the moment we have that smoothness such that we have standing wave, there is possibility for time trajectory. This is a time trajectory. it can actually travel beyond the time energy wave model to connect to that missing piece. And the moment it connects to that missing piece, which initially was electron, by the flipping mechanism of time trajectory, then this electron will now become positron, and then the positron will be injected into the system, and that will energize energy at this suspended area and then propel momentum towards the singularity of the black hole. So this phase, energy is energized. This expanding phase, energy is timed. Then beyond the suspension that we have here, which we have a suspension here known as neutron star suspension. Beyond that suspension, we have time energized phase. So there are three phases here: energy timed phase, energy energized at the central point, energy is energized. Then beyond the suspension, we have time energized phase, and here we have suspension, which is inflationary suspension. Okay, good. So now by now having this positron, before this positron could be injected into the system, there must be instant feedback back to this classical mass worth. Then I need you to know this: the moment we have the smoothness of compacted equilateral triangle at this edge where we have this energy curvature, there is going to be, we're going to have the location of the classical mass worth. We have a kind of consciousness that is not properly rooted. An example of that is when you, let's say in the market, let's say you are in the market, you can be conscious of all the sounds, car sounds, voice of somebody walking in the on the street. All those sounds, you can be conscious of all of them all together. But the sounds may not actually get rooted in you because the sounds are not being internalized. And so we will now move to the next phase. So when you have a consciousness that is not properly rooted to the point that you cannot forget what you have experienced, that is the first phase of consciousness. Now, the second phase of consciousness, where you are able to recollect every experience even when you grow old, that is the next phase, which is known as internalization of the missing piece. Okay, so now the internalization of the missing piece happens at the complex level. That is the level where we have time's trajectory beyond the boundary of time energy wave to connect to the positron. Now, once it connects to that missing piece, the feedback, it has to be feedback. You know, I'm saying feedback. I'm not saying that it is injected back, because the time trajectory is one-way traffic, and I will shed more light on that. And we will see that by iterating our inputs, by resupplying our output as input. Here we'll get that. So now, the moment it gets connected to this, it will send feedback, and that feedback is the reaction of that action of time's trajectory to connect to the positron. That will be the reaction of it. And so once that gets to this classical mass worth, that is the internalization of the missing piece. At that point, this particular value, classical mass worth, will have been drawn to this center line. It will have been drawn to this center line. But if we now try to use this phase to explain it, then we now say that this positron is injected into the system. It's not that it will break this quantum suspension again, because if it breaks this quantum suspension again, then it will mean that it travels 2 times. It travels back again. So now, once it is injected, it will energize this, it will energize the light wave, and then we will have that momentum towards the black hole. Now, you can see that the energy is continually increasing till it reaches the singularity of the black hole. Now, what that means is that when we now look at the tilt effect of time peregrination that we're going to have here, it will be like this. So that will then be the inverse of this. In this phase, we have the tilting effect as the trajectory of time is ahead of the trajectory of discrete energy momentum. But here, energy is being energized such that the momentum of the energy is ahead of the trajectory of time. What is that telling us? That is telling us that the moment that energy will reach this point, because the energy will have to break the neutron stars and get to the root, get to the singularity. The moment it gets here, that will have altered this slant, this diagonal line. It will have altered it horizontally such that this mass word will have classical mass word will be relocated at this central point. So the moment you have this classical mass word right here, that is the ideal location for the mass word to be, and that means that it has gotten that internalization of the missing piece, and so this mass word is then recorded. Because now let me tell you, classical mechanics is as incomplete as quantum mechanics, because when you look at this chart, this is the real mass word, this is energy density. Now, it is not the real classical mass word that causes curvature of energy at classical level. Curvature of time at classical level. It is energy density. Then it means the implication of that is that whatever it is that we think we hold, we are not actually holding it, because there is a kind of repulsive force that suspends whatever it is that touches our hand. In real fact, in real sense, whatever we hold, we are not actually holding. They are not touching they are not having physical contact to our hand. You understand? So we only get that physical contact when we have the emergence of consciousness. When we have the emergence of consciousness. And that is why consciousness is highly needed to break that repulsive force, such that we have direct contact with this classical mass word. And then we have to relocate this mass word such that the what is it called? The field sample of this mass word will then be recorded at event horizon, will be permanently recorded there. And that is the point where you have that consciousness. For instance, let's say you listen to song. If you listen to that song repeatedly for a while, you can internalize that song such that you will remember everything about the song. You remember the beat, you remember everything played in the song. That is the level of internalization of consciousness. So internalization of consciousness, that is the ideal level. Okay, let me use an example. Let me use something that will make us to understand it quite all right. For instance, let's say you know the story in the Bible. God created man. God created Adam. God took out uh, one rib, the bone at his side, one to make a woman. Okay, now from that we can get to know that one piece, the right rib of Adam is missing, and that has formed the woman that the God created. Now for Adam to be a complete person again, he will have to reconnect to that woman, marry that woman. You understand? But now let's now look at it this way. The missing piece is the positron outside the time energy wave model, which is likened to the right rib of Adam. Now, let's say Adam has found the woman and then they were joined together in church. Now, by being joined together in church as husband and wife, that is one level of consciousness. They will have that consciousness that they are one. But they have not done what they're supposed to do to truly become one. But mentally or psychologically, they have that feeling, they have that consciousness that they are one. So that is the level of consciousness where we have the real classical mass world being situated right here, not here. So it is not thoroughly rooted such that we will not forget what we are conscious of. You understand? So now, the moment we have that right here, now let's say they have been joined together in the church, and then later at night, they enter into each other. They enter into each other as husband and wife. By doing that, they have consolidated that union, and so they have made it rooted such that physically, spiritually, they are one. So that can be likened to quantum entanglement, where you have, the entangled particle becoming one. They become one, something that you cannot separate. You understand? So now, that phase where they are able to enter into each other, that they now become one physically and spiritually, is the point where you now have the classical mass world right here. That is when the classical mass world has gone through the internalization of the missing piece. So it has been reconnected to that missing piece, and that internalization has happened, and then it has been recorded in the fabric of the universe, such that it will be there permanently. And once we have a machine, once we have a machine that can actually read event horizon, we can get everything that has entered into black hole. In fact, we can get everything about the universe. So that is that. So basically, we can see that consciousness writes into the fabric of universe. You understand? So we can really have record of events in the universe by being conscious at the level where we have internalization of missing piece, because consciousness itself has to be complete. So now, when we now look at that, the whole flipping mechanism that we have in the universe, for instance, in the optics, where you have the virtual image being created inversely related to the real image, real object. Everything is about, having the necessary configuration, information configuration that can instantiate the complete consciousness that would record such event in the fabric of the universe, such that it will be permanently stored. You understand? So basically, we can relate this to so many things. And then This can as well be likened to the story that Jesus Christ said about somebody that went out to plant. One seed fell on the rock. Being on the rock, it could not be rooted properly, so it gets wasted. One among the thorns, and then it was choked and it died. But there is one that fell on a good soil and then it germinated. So the good soil that Jesus Christ was talking about is a kind of a position that things as a position that things must be in the universe, that we permanently instantiate them such that they can never be uprooted again. So that means that when you read the words of God, if you are not so conversant with the word of God, if you do not read it often and often, you can easily forget. But if you make it your food, then you will never forget. That is what the place is telling us. So now that is that about consciousness. That is that about consciousness. So now then I want to talk about the dynamics of information. The dynamics of information. I said before that information is not void of matter. Now we know that we have one way traffic right here to have this positron. But now what do you think will happen if we have the classical mass worth by using this electrons mass worth? What do you think will happen if we use this classical mass worth in our formula of everything to reconfirm this? Now let's quickly do that. If we put this classical mass worth inside the formula of everything to reconfirm this particular quantum mass worth, by the time we now annihilate the suspended zero, because the mass worth will be suspended, it's only if you use quantum mass worth that you will get the classical mass worth straight up without any suspension. But if you use classical mass worth, then you will initially have the classical suspension that will spontaneously resort to free fall, and then by free fall we have manual annihilation of zeros, such that it travels through the zero to get back to the quantum level. Now at the quantum level, what do we get? Instead of getting this actual value, what we now get is 9.109 times 10 raised power minus 32, not 31 again. You can see that that value is smaller than this particular value, and that means that second trip we have to break this quantum suspension, and by breaking it there will be radiation, and that will lead to mass decay. That mass decay is the result of the value that we have here. So the singularity that instantiated or that initiated this vertical line has been shifted forward, and so we can know that it is being shifted forward into the black hole because it's in form of contraction, because we have mass decay. That mass decay will as well decay the classical mass worth if we supply that value, which is 9.109 times 10 raised power minus 32 kilogram. If you put that inside this formula of everything to reconfirm this classical mass worth, it will have shifted this position of the mass worth, and instead of getting 2,277,250,000 kilograms, guess what we get? What we get is going to be 277,250,000 kilograms. About 2 billion worth of mass worth has been decayed. So with that, we can track the momentum of this formula, and it is forward ever, and that is the trajectory of time, because time moves forward ever. And so we can see the radiation, we can see entropy right inside the black hole, because energy, is increasing in that phase, unlike here where we have energy is reducing. So now, that is that about consciousness. But now, for us to get the picture of the fact that consciousness is not void of matter, let's quickly get back to this scenario so that you can see the real picture of the internalization and all that. Now, in the previous video, I used this diagram. Now, let's say we have a scenario where the mechanical system of brain to harmonize different sequences of rhythm and melodic sequential notes of varied interval as a unified sensation of instancy. By having this scenario, when we analyze it through this diagram, we know that there is a kind of convergence for consciousness for it to be smooth, such that it will give us the clarity that we have. So let's say different instrumentals are being played. You have orchestra of varied sequence. You have drums of varied tempos. You have bass and lead guitars being played at, different intervals. When you look at that, you see that you have a momentum. So you can see them converging, and when they get to this phase, where this phase is known as conscious processing machine. Consciousness processing machine. This phase. Now, what we have here, all those things being played, we don't have the tangible worth of all those things. We only have electromagnetic field sample. So we have electric signals of those things being played. And when they get to this phase, they get harmonized such that we are able to hear them once as if they are being played at the same interval, like they are being played at the same interval. So we hear them once, and then we can actually understand everything. So we call this phase conscious awareness. We first of all have that conscious awareness, but that consciousness is not being internalized, and so we can easily forget everything being played in the music, even the music. But the moment we travel beyond this level, such that we travel beyond the time energy wave model as we have in that diagram, to connect to the missing piece, then we have what is known as internalization of the missing piece. So this will then go back to feed this our consciousness and relocate it at the central horizontal line, where we have intersection of vertical and horizontal line, like what we have here. It will relocate this quantum mass world, this classical mass world, to this point, and this is where we have the intersection of the horizontal line and then the vertical line. That is where the internalization of missing piece will be instantiated. And once we are there, then this internalization will make it to be so rooted that we will not be able to forget anything played in the music, and that will now equal to the output. Now, all those things being played, they are the input. The output will now be subjective awareness. So subjective awareness will mean that the consciousness will be your personal experience. It's going to be your reality, because what one person feel as consciousness might be different from what other person feel. And so that we actually, all those things, everything we have here has answered the hard questions that we have, the hard questions of consciousness. That is, why is it that the conscious feeling is subjective? You understand? Because it is something that we get. It's more or less like a field that we have from outside, but it will be internalized such that it will feel as if It's our intrinsic reality. You understand? So the output will now be subjective awareness. Then in the previous video, I uploaded one video. In that previous video, I made mention of dynamic of information. That is what I just explained by saying that the time trajectory is one-way traffic, and so further into the future we change the mass worth. So now when you look at this, we can say that the pain sensation is information. So aspirin is a drug that can actually alleviate pain. So the chemical composition is C9H804. So now this is also an information. Now, how if we now explain how we get to feel pain, we will know that then pain is an information, because there is a chemical release known as prostaglandin that will be released whenever there is injury on our body or there is any kind of pain. When that chemical release is being continually produced, the information of its production will be sent to the brain, and that brain will now initiate that pain sensation. So the work of aspirin is to inhibit the production of that prostaglandin such that that pain will now be alleviated. So you can say that the chemical release is a matter. The information, that chemical release, will be transported to the brain. So the virtue of being moved from one place to another is transmission of information. So now information is not void of matter when it is quantified. You understand? So basically, that has explained what consciousness is. Consciousness, when it transmits information instantly, it becomes something that is quantified in form of matter that can actually travel and be felt as consciousness. So that is what consciousness is, my people. And here we have the transition from 2D to 3D, because that is the structure that we convey the transportation to the complex system level. So the internalization of the missing piece is complex system integration, which is known as flipping mechanism at beyond the quantum state. And then we have flipped equilateral triangle here, and that is known as imputation, if there is anything like that. So basically, before we can have real full consciousness of 2D, there must be a transition into the 3D, and then being in the 3D, we can fully be conscious of the 2D. And if we want to be conscious of the 3D state, we will need to move to the 4D for us to be completely be conscious of 3D. So there we have this interlocked of dimensions, even to, and it is because of that interlocked of dimension, which is the structure of the universe, that we can have transition from normal system to complex system, and that complex system must be integrated as internalization of missing piece for us to have a complete conscious experience. And then the whole thing will be subjective experience, to be personal to us. So that is that about consciousness. With that, I have used formula of everything to solve the mystery of consciousness. So I will put a link to my research publication in the description below. Don't hesitate to click on that to explore this further. Then please share this with your friend, and then subscribe to my channel. Thank you.